Your environment is such a huge predictor of how you end up and where and how capable you become, because we use our environment as the litmus test to determine good and bad ideas. We are constantly testing whether we are going to be accepted or outed from social interactions. So to avoid the tall poppy syndrome of a small town or a small little place like New Zealand, like Australia, like some of the small towns I know are in the US, I know the UK's incredibly prevalent for it. Change your environment. All right, legends, just finishing up a bit of editing, bit of work, and just having a little sit and a think. Super beautiful out. I don't know if you can see in the reflection there. I'll show you what it looks like. Let me crank this down because that is going to be way too bright. Let's bring that down. Yeah, maybe hard to see, but look at that. Anyway, that's what I'm looking at. You guys can look at me because that's just the way it is. But you can sort of get the reflection, which is nice. Let's just make that back to how it was. No. No. Yeah, about that is good. Yeah, I was just thinking, I guess, while I was sitting here around leaving your hometown and getting away from it. So I grew up on a little island in New Zealand. I think pretty early on, just because there was limited schools where I went. I was always going to go to school in the city. And that was like the first checkpoint of leaving my hometown. And I remember I was so reluctant to go. I was probably like 14, 15, super, super reluctant to go, like kicked and screamed. I would have been younger, like 10 or 11. Kicked and screamed because like I had all my mates. We went to the skate park and we like did all that. But the trajectory that I would have been on if I'd stayed there, small island was like very hippie origins, that sort of vibe. Definitely would have been smoking a lot of weed. Wouldn't have done much with my life, I don't think, if I'd stayed on the island. And I think leaving the home, I think that home time was that first shift of environment. Obviously, it was a massive push from my parents. I was now in a school. I went to a private school called St. Kent's, big rugby school in New Zealand. And that was the first push from the parents. Like, you know, they put the foot down. They said, we care obviously massively about your education. We're willing to invest in that. Very fortunate to have been able to invest in that as well. And they made that investment and they shook up that environment. And at the time, I sort of thought like, no, I don't want to do this, don't want to do this. And yeah, the first couple of years were really tough. I was like an island boy, ran around with my shoes off, was just like, had long, long hair, was a bit of a skater, surfer, like bit of an attitude, all of that stuff. My academics were shocking. I didn't even know like the days of the week in order. And I came to this big fancy school that had a uniform and we had a suit and tie and it was posh and I just felt so out of place. But as time, you know, law of averages, but I remember I went into the bottom math class when I first started. And yeah, over time, that environment began to mold me. And then when I was 15, 16, I was playing more rugby. And because I lived on this island, I was commuting by ferry every single day. So it was an hour each way. And I made the decision, I asked mum and dad, so I'd really like to go to boarding school. And that was now the second change of environment. But the change of environment came from my own decision. And, you know, mum and dad, credit to them. They said, yeah, we can make that happen. And I applied at the boarding house and I got in and we were there, and of 2,000 students who lived or went to the school, there was maybe 150 that went to the boarding school. So it was a real moment of being at this boarding school surrounded by, again, another group, another shift, and a lot of the rugby boys. We used to get a lot of great rugby players from Tonga, from Fiji, from Samoa, or from other parts of New Zealand as well, places like Mount Maunganui, you know, like these areas around typically that weren't as affluent as the area the school was in. So the environment cultivated this very humble environment, which was awesome. No one was flashy despite it being a very expensive school. Some people were, you know, you couldn't help that. But as a whole, I felt the school was very humble with its money because the environment produced a balance and quite a diverse group of people that weren't all paying the same to be there. And we're all there for different reasons and valued maybe some different things. So growing up in that, it was very religious as well. again, like going through that boarding school, amazing. And then I decided, end of what was second to last year, I decided to really start taking my academics seriously. I decided I wanted to go to Sydney, and getting across to Sydney Uni was going to be a really important part of my final year. And being at the boarding school, it allowed me more time, yes, for my rugby, but also more time for my study. And I actually really locked in my final year, and I went pretty all in. So from bottom math class in year 11, I ended up being the Ducks. So number one in NCA, which is our national criteria education assessment. It was like the New Zealand national standard. And I got number one in the entire school of about 2,000 people in my final year. And that told me, one, it taught me delayed gratification. So sacrificing now, which was doing that work throughout the year, not going out to some of those parties, not staying late to do those things and actually study and get the work done. And you get that delayed gratification when you get that result at end of year. Also taught me that like when you really apply yourself, you can shock yourself at how capable you are. And I remember I definitely shocked a few teachers when I stood up there and accepted that award at the end of the year. It definitely raised a few eyebrows because I wasn't known as an academic or someone who's smart. I was sort of a popular kid that was a bit of a class clown for a lot of that time. Using that great result that I got and earned, I then got a scholarship into Sydney Uni, both for the university and for the college. And I went over, played rugby there as well. And that was again another shift and another change of environment. Now, when I moved to Sydney, I got thrown into an environment of quite wealthy, affluent people that had come to this college, and there was a lot of history. You know, the college is about 160 years old. There was a lot of old boys where their dads had gone to the college. It was passed down. There was a lot of tradition. And that environment became very interesting. It definitely, I saw myself change. I was drinking so much. We drank like 3 times a week, drinking so much. The rugby culture was pretty toxic as well. And I was seeing that environment, and it was amazing how molded you become and how quickly you forget your roots when you're put into that style and type of environment. So again, it went from the island, changed the hometown to Auckland to going to school, then to boarding school, then to Sydney, another change of environment. Again, only 3 hours away from home, but the acceptance to leave home really put me out of my shell, put me in a new environment and forced me to grow. I think for anyone who hasn't been put in a new environment, you don't have that opportunity to grow. You don't have that opportunity to be given new stimulus to push you out of your comfort zone. And for growth, you need to be pushed out of your comfort zone. While I was in Sydney, I then finished up, and in my final year of college, I went on exchange to Edinburgh University. Now that was a good time, but definitely like a bit of a degenerate era for myself. I don't think I've ever been so useless with my life or my direction. I was sort of finishing up uni. It was pass and fail, which when you're on exchange basically means pass or fail. Like there's no grade that counts to your overall GPA, like your grade point average. So because of that, it was basically like half-ass it, which I did. And that didn't feel very good. I think just like flunking and getting by and getting sick, it didn't feel great, to be honest. And like my whole university experience, I don't think I gave it my all at all. There were some subjects I did well in. I topped a few of the marketing ones, but beyond that, studying finance and marketing, I think I just chose it because it felt right and I was falling into that. Post university, ended up landing a graduate job at Procter and Gamble, which is a big FMCG company, so fast-moving consumer goods. Now, this is the most corporate company you could imagine. They're S&P 500, so on the top 500 companies in the US. Huge conglomerate, right? Multinational. And I remember coming in day one to the Sydney office, and they sat us down, the grads. There was maybe 4 or 5 graduates in the sales team. I got into the sales. I asked to be into the marketing, but they put me in the sales, and they brought me in and they sat down in front of me. It was like Ian, Sandra, Alyssa, I can't remember the names, but it was sort of 6 of the C-suite execs, you know, the sales director, head of marketing, all of these people. And it was meant to be a very inspirational introduction to the company. And it was, hi, my name's Ian. I've been here for 30 years. And that was the next person, the next person. And then for me, I looked at it and I just thought, this is the least inspiring thing I could ever imagine. I remember getting out and calling my dad and being like, I'm going to need something because I ain't staying here for the rest of my life. If I'm here in 30 years, something's gone horribly wrong. That's not to say, you know, there's nothing wrong with the 9 to 5 if you seek that level of comfort. But for me, I knew I wanted something more from from that second of seeing it and realizing this is the reality, and if I don't change it, this is going to be me for the next 30 years, it sort of flicked that switch in me to be like, this ain't it. I'm not going to let that be the book that was written on Alfie Robertson. And from there, almost like almost like clockwork, Dom, a guy, messaged me out of almost nowhere, having had a few mutual connections, and he asked me if I'd be interested in running a large events company in Sydney. And he basically said, I run it in the UK. It's during COVID. We can't run it anymore. Australia and New Zealand are the only place we can run this thing. And the idea is we combine live sport, live music, and we do it at race courses. And I thought, oh, it's a cool concept. I like it. We sell into students. I thought, got a pretty good student connection, went to college. I could probably help with that. And we struck a deal, and I was the event manager for their first event in Sydney. And he paid me purely on commission. And on our first event, we sold 2,000 tickets in 5 minutes and did about 120,000 AUD in revenue on our first event. And the model was very clever. We were at race courses, which weren't very attractive to Gen Z and millennials. So the way we pitched it in and sold it was we said, look, you've got unallocated space, basically an area in the race course that you're never going to be able to sell. Then we'll basically come in and take over that space and manage it for you. What this allowed us to do was create a very profitable business where essentially we took a very high margin because our cost to actually fill each spot in the racecourse was very, very low. We were paying roughly $5 a head, I think it was, on our first event, and we were charging about $50 for the ticket, so 10x. We then covered the DJs, which were typically like students, although this one we splashed out, got Setmo, and then we did client liaison, I think, in the next one. And I'm trying to think of the one we did after. It will come to me. But this was the first taste of entrepreneurship. It was the first taste of, holy shit, I can actually build something that people connect with and a real brand behind it as well. And from there, it's just been rolling in terms of entrepreneurial ideas and things that I can try. I tried a few things from there, and while my time was winding up with Procter and Gamble, I lasted about 18 months before I decided to go all in a startup in Singapore in climate technology. Took on a job of a climate consultant, which I had no idea about, no degree in climate consulting apart from my finance and marketing degree. And wow, that was a roller coaster ride. The company was valued at around 100 million when I joined. We raised about 10 million USD in equity. Moved to, or not moved to, but traveled to and from Singapore incredibly frequently. We did a lot of work in Indonesia, so I ended up having a stint in Bali, going to places like Jakarta, to central Kalimantan and the Borneo rainforest to see these large-scale projects. We're basically quantifying carbon emissions, so the carbon dioxide that trees basically abate from the sky, abate from the atmosphere. So the net exchange of gases, we were basically measuring that. So that's how much carbon they were sequestering, which is when they abate, take it out of the atmosphere, they pull it into the ground and they keep it locked in there, which obviously helps reduce the Earth's temperature because we're removing greenhouse gases from the environment. And our job was to come in and say, okay, well, if you're a palm oil conglomerate and you're going to knock down 50,000 hectares, what damage is that going to have to the environment in terms of CO2? And if we don't do that, and if we reforest that and we protect it and we cultivate this land, what benefit is that going to have? And that benefit, the delta between those two, is what we could go and sell to big multinationals. Now, this was at a time when climate change was at its very peak and people were incredibly interested in it. As the economy sort of contracted a little bit and we've moved to a world that now is preferencing things like stability within the nation and ensuring that interest rates are down and inflation, climate change has been bumped down the ladder. So these models are sadly less operational and just climate change is less of a preference. Again, I did about 18 months, and during this time, I began starting creating content. And a big part of that, talking about changing environments, was going and living in Bali. Bali is one of those places where there are a lot of creators and there's a lot of people just giving it a go. Now, I think Bali has a lot of entrepreneurs as well, people that think they're super entrepreneurial, but maybe they're living some nomadic life and pretending to work in a cafe, and that's not to be bitter. But it also has just a massive tolerance for people giving it a go. There is zero tall poppy syndrome. And that's all the point I think I was trying to get across with this whole chat, which is your environment is such a huge predictor of how you end up and where and how capable you become. Because we use our environment as the litmus test to determine good and bad ideas. We are constantly testing whether we are going to be accepted or outed from social interactions. And if we have an environment that is incredibly negative to new ideas, to creation, to putting yourself out there, to being an entrepreneur, to putting your hand up and saying you want more in life, of course, we're going to shut those ideas down and become less capable in our nature. So being able to change the environment and go and taste what it's like to be in a nomadic place like Bali, where there are lots of entrepreneurs who are very set on that style, was the first eye-opening moment for being in a new environment. Hello, how are we doing? Oui, parler. Je parle français un petit peu. Ouais, bonjour. Pour le front, c'est down and round. Ouais, pas de problème. At that time as well, Jake had basically had this crazy rise on social media, going from like 5,000 followers, where Jake himself had set out this task of being like, you know what, I don't want to be a PT forever. I, was at Barry's boot camp. I don't want to do that forever. And he started posting and said, for that year of 2023, he was going to post every single day. And credit to him, he did. And it was about May when he'd hit 5,000 followers. So super slow grind from like February when he started. And then one reel took him from 5,000 all the way to like 250,000 in a week. And it had bag reels and he had, Kelly Slater messaging all of his idols. And I sort of saw that while we're in Bali. All of a sudden we're hanging out with pro surfers, with like Ko Smith, we're playing paddle with them. It's like Jay Alvarez is there. All of these people that I had watched their YouTube for years were suddenly giving us time of day because of the social currency of his following. And it was such a eye-opening moment for me, being like, wow, this like social media thing's a real thing and people really care. And not just people like superficial people that are like, oh, you've got a following that's cool, like what LA's built up, but real people care and people genuinely care and it's a real currency. And for me, I think that in September, after being in Bali, traveling abroad and, completing my era of degeneracy, which ended in Ibiza for my 24th birthday, it was a massive wake up of like, wow, this social media is a real thing. So when I came back in September of 2023, I was like, you know what, I've got to give it a crack. If I'm an entrepreneur and I want to build great businesses, I'm going to need to market them at some point anyway. So why not start and just see if I can build a following? So I started 75 Day Hard and I started my social media journey. And that was when I came back to Sydney and decided, you know what, let's just do it. Let's try something different. And yeah, last 18 months, for those who followed the journey, it's been a pretty crazy ride. And literally everything, every door I've opened through, every opportunity, every network person I've met in the last 18 months, every sale I've made has come through social media, through organic social media growth, which is pretty crazy to say. And now to be in the position where I am, travel when I want. I've hired a massive team, got about 60 people that report into me now. We've got massive sales teams. We're doing 500K plus a month. We've got a coaching business that's world renowned. We've trained over 17,000 clients. Amplify is growing. We've got 500 members inside the community. My templates have been used by thousands of people to deliver viral content. Like, to say it doesn't even seem real out loud, but at the same time, it feels like this is only the beginning. So it's this beautiful duality of excitement of where it's going to go and almost a level of being proud but not satisfied. Excitement of where I've gone and then a level of pride of where I've been and what I've gone through to get here as well. Because I think my job on social media is to paint it as sunshine and rainbows when it definitely hasn't been the whole way. It's a tough journey. There's a lot of work that goes into building a business of this size. You end up managing a lot of people, a lot of egos, a lot of personalities. There's systems that break, people that leave. You've got friends involved. It's incredibly complex, and you're building these big beasts that are now transforming from, oh, you're just a solopreneur, doing this cool startup, great, to like, no, you're a fucking real business. You're building like a marketing machine and you're getting these amazing results. So I think with that, it's just become a new sort of step up in everything that I do. Um, but yeah, it's been like super exciting, and I'm stoked with everything thus far. And I think we're just getting started, which is really cool. I think there's a couple points I've crossed between there, but I think the most important one I wanted to get through was that changing the environment and moving yourself to an environment that's more conducive for growth. And I think coming from Australia and New Zealand, although I love them both dearly, they're not always conducive for growth. The reason being is that they are filled with people that have the tall poppy syndrome. When they see people who are successful and they see people doing better than them, the first thing is not to think and ask how. It's more to ask, or more to put down and to criticize and to question and to undermine them. Maybe say they got lucky, maybe say they already had money, maybe say, make fun of it or whatever it is. And I still get made fun of loads. And that's the thing that everyone needs to understand. Whether you've got 100 followers and you're posting for the first time, or you've got 1 million followers, people are always going to make fun of you. You always look like an idiot talking to a camera in public. It's a weird piece of behavior to do. It's definitely not done by normal people, because normal people don't need to film themselves or don't have the urge to film themselves all the time. So yeah, like I still get made fun of all the time, and that's just part of it as well. But I would so happily be made fun of all the time and have all the success, freedom, travel, and all the things that I can do. That is more than happy to make that trade-off. And the most important part is that the friends, the family, everyone I've got around me is my support network and my circle. And if you can have those people that you rely on, that cherish your wins and share your losses, those are your friends that you will keep for life. And that is the definition of a good friend. And a good friend not only cherishes your wins and shares your losses, but a good friend does the same to you as well. And you should know that, and you should make sure you do that. We should never be envious of our friend group. I've always believed in a socialist inner circle where if I win, you win as well, and a capitalist outer circle where in society I operate as a capitalist, but in my inner circle I work as a socialist. I think that's incredibly important. So to avoid the tall poppy syndrome of a small town or a small little place like New Zealand, like Australia, like some of the small towns I know are in the US, I know the UK is incredibly prevalent for it. Change your environment. And if you can't change the city you're in or the country you're in, then just change the environment by going to a new sports club, by going to a run club you haven't been to, by going to a different gym, by trying a new class, by going to a yoga class. Just change your environment in another way. There are groups and there are circles out there that will support you and your ambition. You don't need to stick in the same circle just because it feels comfortable. And that is super, super important to remember. All right, rant over. But I think that's really important to remember. I think, yeah, it was lovely to go back and speak through the journey to you guys. And I think this is the beauty about doing long form, which is still new to me. But I think having an opportunity to share my story in a longer format that's not just quick cut, fancy B-roll, nice, pretty content is a great opportunity to see a more raw and authentic self, and also take you on a journey. I've got some pretty amazing things lined up. The vision for Amplify is crystal clear in my head. Where I want to take it, what we're building is something really, really special. And it's not going to be like anything else out there. And we keep showing up every day and proving that to ourselves. So I think taking you on that journey and showing how we don't just manifest it online, but we bring it into the personal as well. So yeah, it's an exciting time. Talk soon.